How's it going, everyone? Bob here, KD4BMG HOA Ham. Yep, that's one of the two professionally designed golf courses here in my HOA. It's late in the day. I thought I would take a 25-foot telescoping whip, put it on top of an M25 coil to get on 40 meters, and see if I could attract any attention. Today we're going to talk about one of the most basic types of antennas that we use in portable ham radio operations. I use it frequently, backyard portable. It's one of my favorite antennas for using POTA. And I'm talking about a vertical multi-banded antenna. Why do I call it multi-banded? When we think about a 17-foot telescoping whip, we think 20 meters. But if you start to collapse that 17 feet down, you can get resonant on 17, 15, 12, 10, and 6 meters just by shortening the length of this 17-foot long whip. You can get resonant, therefore it is multi-banded. You work, you reduce the length, you achieve a result, you get resonant on multiple bands. Add to this the loading coil, and then all of a sudden what you end up with is 40 meters. So you have 6 through 40 when you add this loading coil to the bottom of this antenna. We'll talk about feed points here in a moment. I just want to try to explain what happens when we add the loading coil to these antennas. This is the M-Coil from Chameleon added to the SS17. You can get up to 40 meters. Now, this is one of the originals that was introduced. You'll see there are no holes on the side above or below the black covering. When Chameleon Antenna introduced the SS25, 25 feet long versus 17 feet long, and they created the M25 coil, now all of a sudden we have holes on the top and the bottom of that loading coil. Now, some of you are newer amateur radio operators, and let me be very clear, those are not for radials. Now, they will use the same size banana plugs that we use for radials, but those are not radial holes, those are jumper holes. They let us put a jumper from the top side to the bottom side of the coil to bypass the coil. I'll explain that in just a couple of minutes. So the reason that these types of antennas are popular is because they give us the opportunity to set up and deploy rapidly for 6 through 40 meters. Which is better, the 17-foot with the M-Coil or the 25-foot with the M25 coil? Well, when we say height is might, that is a bad definition, a bad direction. It's incorrect when it relates to dipoles. Dipoles have very specific heights that they should be hung based on the operating bands that the antenna is set up for. So dipoles have specific heights to be hung. As it relates to verticals, generally speaking, height is might. So is a 17-foot whip with the M-Coil an effective antenna? Yes, this is absolutely an effective antenna system. We've been using these for quite some time. Is the SS25 with the M25 coil a better antenna? Well, it's likely going to perform a little bit better because it is longer. It's 8 feet longer, so we would expect to get better performance. If you already own an SS17, then go ahead and get yourself an M-Coil. If you want the extra height to get a little bit extra better performance, then the combination of the SS25 and the M25 coil would perform slightly better. So it's budget, it's how many different antennas you want in your arsenal, if you can afford them all, and you have space for them like I do on my arsenal wall of antennas, then I have all of them. If you can only afford one, you haven't purchased either yet, I would purchase the SS25 and the M25 coil because they can both get you on 6 through 40. This one will perform a little better. Now, we'll talk about that jumper here in just a moment, but let's talk about feed points. How are we going to get these antennas erected? Chameleon has been developing Lego-like parts. They call them impasse ready, and the intention is that they fit together with multiple components so you can have a very high number of different deployments using different construction of the antenna. So many of their items are interchangeable. It doesn't mean that you have to use Chameleon antenna parts to fly an SS25, and I actually replaced the 17 and the 25-foot whips with this 58-inch. It's collapsed. Let's just pretend that this here is an SS25. I can fit it on my workbench a lot better, so this SS58 is going to pretend, we're all going to pretend it's an SS25 attached to the M25 coil. So I have done a video on the lowest cost ground spike for ham radio. I've talked about BD7 Maple quite some time ago. BD7 Maple manufactures, or did, a UHF as well as a 3/8 by 24 version. As a matter of fact, he did that. I presume a he. I've never met or actually physically talked to the person. After I said, hey, can we have a 3/8 by 24 version, they made that. So their feed point from BD7 Maple, who's no longer on eBay, but I'll leave a link to a new store that opened up. This is 100% manufactured in China. It's decent quality, but a new store has appeared on eBay. I don't know how long they're going to be around. I'm not sure what the tariff situation is doing to them. Everything from here up is all USA manufactured, and here we're going to have China manufactured. But this ground spike setup, that came from Home Depot, $1, and then this is a mirror mount that has a 3/8 by 24 on the top and then a UHF connector on the bottom. So we can run our coax here. So this is low cost, less versatile. I've never used either of these with the SS25. I have used both of these with an SS17. So theoretically, with an SS17 and that M-Coil, you could get away with using something like this. Perhaps you already own one of these pieces of gear. Chameleon makes things that are much more versatile in that you can take this blank adapter and not only put it on a ground spike, but you can put it on a universal clamp mount, or you can put it onto a jaw mount. So there are multiple ways of using the Chameleon gear. It's much more adaptable to various circumstances. All right, that said, the original ground spike from Chameleon, I believe that's about 15 inches long, and then the new spike, I believe this spike here, is this 21 inches long? Yeah, that's 21 inches long and 15. And oh, by the way, this BD7 Maple spike, let's just go length to length of the spike, forget the top piece here. That BD7 Maple spike is 9 inches compared to 13.5 on the original Chameleon spike. So that's something else you need to keep in mind if you're going to use something like this. Even the shortest Chameleon is longer than the units that come out of China or Home Depot hardware bin. And then this one here, the spike on this one is 19.5 inches. So these can absolutely handle the weight and torsion, side force of a SS25. And so I think this is probably the direction you should be looking for an SS25. The other thing you should keep in mind is that you can incorporate a puck with the blank adapter, which will then go on top of the ground spike. And now you've got your ground radials here on a puck. So you've got ground radials with the blank adapter, and then with the combination of this, we have a complete setup for your deployment of 6 through 40 meters. You've got the ground spike into the ground, super deep to not have to worry about whether or not the wind can blow over the SS25. We've got a ground radial puck. We've got our coax feed sending RF in and out between our antenna and our transceiver. We've got the loading coil, and then we've got our SS25. So let's talk about building this jumper so we can jump past the loading coil and turn this SS25 into something other than a 40-meter antenna, 20, 15, 17, 12, 10, and 6. And then we're going to go outside and we're going to figure out what we can do when we end up at a park and we're trying to operate parks on the air, and we find out all of a sudden that they don't like us sticking ground spikes into their ground. How are we going to get this mounted? Or maybe you have all the gear in your vehicle and you pull into a parking lot and you have blacktop. You can't get this into the ground. What are you going to do? What are some of our alternatives? I'm just going to show one of my new favorites that stays in my truck all the time. It's how I would set up if all of a sudden I found myself in a situation where I was portable and couldn't use my ground spike, but I still wanted to get a 25-foot antenna up in the air. What's the best way to do it, and is it secure? So let me explain how this is going to work. This is an SS25. It takes up almost all the workbench. So we're going to pretend that this SS58 is an SS25 because I can fit the whole thing here on the workbench. I've got my ground spike into the ground. I've got my feed point here, which is just passing through RF to the antenna, taking it back to my transceiver through my coax feed right here. And what's going to happen when you fully extend the SS25, it's not where it needs to be yet for 40 meters. This coil adds the balance of length, so to speak, that you need to give this SS25 40 meters. That's very fast, simple setup, 40 meters. But if you want to operate something other than 40 meters with this setup, what do you have to do? Well, if you wanted to operate, say, 20, not only would you have to collapse the SS25 down to something closer to 17 feet plus a little bit, you would have to stop and unscrew this and take the coil off. That's where this jumper comes in. By inserting the jumper here, it bypasses the coil windings here in the coil. So if you take the SS25 and you collapse it down close to that 17 foot, you put the jumper on, the RF is going into the jumper and it is bypassing the coil going up to the 17 foot length that you collapsed the SS25 down to. So in essence, here you've got a 40 meter antenna with the SS25 fully extended. Put the jumper on it, and then you can begin to collapse the 25-foot whip down to 17 feet for 20, and then collapse it further for 17, further for 15, further for 12. You get the idea. All of a sudden, this antenna with this setup and a jumper gives you 6 through 40 meters resonant. That's what the purpose of the coil is, and that's what the purpose of the jumper is. The jumper bypasses the coil windings in the coil, and it lets you reduce the length of your 25-foot whip to get resonant on other bands. So that's why we have a jumper. Let me take you through the steps of creating this little jumper. I use high-quality Sewell banana jacks, banana plugs, and these I've used repeatedly, so yep, they do have a little bit of corrosion on them. I have reused them on multiple radial wires, and now I'm going to use them in making a jumper. On the barrel that you insert your wire into, it has 2 set screws that allow you to torque down on that wire once you've inserted it. And now that my set screws are pulled out and removed from the side of the barrel, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get the second one ready to do the exact same thing to it. The cover then just simply screws off and goes over top of the tip after you've created your wire jumper. So I'm going to be inserting this into the coil here so I can get an idea of how long I want to make the wire. I'm going to cut the wire to length. I'm going to double over the wire. So in other words, I'm cutting off and then I'm stripping double the depth of the barrel so I can fold the wire over on itself and create a bulk of wire that I'm going to insert inside of that barrel. There you can see I'm folding it over. I'm going to fold it over the balance. Now it's like it's one single strand, and in it goes to the barrel, and now I'm going to tighten up those 2 set screws. And once I tighten up those 2 set screws, one on each side, I'll put the cover over top of the banana jack once again, and then I will cut the wire to length and repeat on the other side. And I'll go ahead and speed it up here so you don't have to watch me for the next minute and a half complete this process. You have the idea. And now that we have our jumper manufactured, what we're going to do here is assure that we have good continuity so that the jumper does its job. Always make sure you put your multimeter with its good face down, the glass side down, so none of the sharp bits and bops inside of your case scratch it up. I use a Kaiweets multimeter to check continuity quite frequently, and I like this one because when I turn it on, it tells me which probe to insert where on the multimeter. I'm not a genius when it comes to this kind of thing, so I can use all the help I can possibly get. And we're going to check real quick here, and look at that, we do indeed have continuity. We're good to go. So we have a jumper that is going to work. It's going to allow the RF to travel from one side of the coil to the other, completely bypassing the coil. I do sometimes forget that not everyone who watches my videos is an experienced ham. So let's just treat this as though you've never installed an antenna like this. And while I can push my antenna into my ground in the backyard here in the Tampa Bay area, you might need a rubber mallet to go ahead and put that ground spike in the ground. I've attached my radial puck to the bottom of the blank adapter. That blank adapter isn't doing anything to the signal other than letting it pass from your transceiver into the antenna and from the antenna back to your transceiver. Since I started the video, I was able to pick up one of the M-Coils that does have the bypass holes machined into it. Many times my videos get started and there are weeks, occasionally months, in between the start and the finish because there's just a lot happening when I try to put together this informative review for you to understand how to use this. You've seen me throw radials before. That is BN Techco wire. It is silicone wire. It is silky smooth and it's very easy to spread out. Here I'm going to go ahead and put the jumper in, and we'll review that in a second and talk about what that's doing, referring back to some of the prior things we talked about in the video. Again, back to the BN Techco wire, because it is silky smooth, it doesn't tangle easily at all. So I do wind up a wire in a very specific way to put it into a bundle that I can just grab the banana plug and then toss it in the bundle and it spreads itself out. And again, you can see how quickly I can unravel this. It doesn't get tangled at all. It is silky smooth. All right, jumper removed. We're good on 40 meters. Jumper installed. We're good on 20 meters. Then we can collapse that SS17 and get on higher bands. With the SS25 and the M25, we bypass it. We're good on 30 meters and up. Remove that jumper cable, and the bypass is removed, and we're good on 40 meters. In my opening drone-like shot, I wasn't kidding about setting up here in my HOA. I am on the back side of the golf course. I'm parked as far away from the clubhouse as I can get. You can imagine that I might attract some attention here in the HOA. But this is a common method of me deploying antennas when I'm trying to get them on a very robust mast, which you would need for something like an SS25 25-foot long telescoping antenna. And so I use this Max Gain Systems heavy-duty telescoping fiberglass mast. I'm using gear ties. They're basically, I don't know, overgrown pipe cleaners, and they just cinch things down really tight, and I'm attaching that mast to the back of my truck. This is a heavy-duty precision machined mast topper with 5 holes for hanging wire antennas and a center 3/8 by 24 threaded hole. On the bottom side, it has an opening of 1-inch diameter to put on top of any 1-inch post that is robust enough to handle any heavy antennas that you want to put on it. For me, I'm going to put the SS25 25-foot telescoping whip, and yeah, there's some weight to this and some shear load when the wind gets a hold of it. I've installed the full-length MPass 2.0 antenna. That would be the military extension and the SS17, so I think that equates to about 25 feet. And I've used this same combination of topper and Max Gain Systems fiberglass mast. I've installed the tactical delta loop on top of this and actually flown it about 12 feet up in the air. That's what this mast will go up to, about 12 feet. I did recently pick up a larger mast from Max Gain Systems because I really like this. and it will be able to fit in the bed of my truck. I'll show you my assembling that here down the road and how I keep it in my truck, or truckette if you want to call it. This is a Hyundai Santa Cruz. It is a miniature truck. Never thought I would own such a thing, but wow, do I love it. But that bed is only 4 feet by 4 feet, so I've got to be creative with the type of mast that I'll be keeping there. This 12-foot mast stays permanently on the floor in the back of my vehicle. Let's go ahead and get that SS25 fully extended. We'll throw some ground radials out here and we'll be ready to go ahead and operate. I don't know if you can see in the background, just off the right of my left shoulder, there's a small vehicle moving back there. I think there's a golf cart coming into the picture. Earlier in the demonstration, I said, what would you do if you couldn't get a ground spike in the ground? Because maybe your POTA park doesn't permit this. Maybe they don't want you throwing wires up in a tree, and that's perfectly fine. Here with a mast like this and that mast topper that lets me have a 3/8 by 24 threaded hole that I can put my M-Coil in, my blank adapter, and my SS25, not a problem. I can deploy in a parking lot, and while blacktop is not an ideal surface, it's better than nothing. I can deploy right here up against a field, so you have all kinds of options to get your blank adapter, your M25 coil, and your SS25 up in the air to operate on 40 meters. Yep, that is a golf cart back there. No worries, they're playing through, they're having fun. I know, isn't it horrible living in an HOA where I have 2 professionally designed golf courses at my disposal? As usual, I'm trying to demonstrate how to use some of the best gear out there for portable amateur radio operations. If you have any suggestions for deployment beyond what I've shown, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I hope you found this useful, friend. I'll talk to you soon. 73.